Hello, family. Enjoy this great and beautiful moment with Afri Stories. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and comment. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and don't miss future videos from us. Sit back and relax as we dive into story. Sienna's phone buzzed insistently against her desk, the screen flashing Lila over and over again. It was barely 7 in the morning, and she hadn't even taken her first sip of coffee. With a sigh, she picked up. "Lila!" The response was a choked sob. Sienna sat up straighter, her heart hammering. "Lila, what's wrong?" "I can't do it," her best friend whispered between ragged breaths. "Sienna, I can't marry him." Sienna's blood ran cold. Today was Lila's wedding day. And not just any wedding. She was about to marry Killian Drake. Billionaire, ruthless businessman, a man with power and influence so vast, rumors claimed he could ruin anyone with a single phone call. Sienna had only met him once, and it had been enough. His piercing blue eyes held no warmth, no kindness. He was dangerous, a man who controlled everything in his world. And today, he was expecting a bride at the altar. "Lila, listen to me," Sienna said carefully, lowering her voice. "You can't just back out. Do you know what this means?" "I don't care," Lila sobbed. "Sienna, if I marry him, my life is over. He's cold. I know he doesn't love me. It's all about business for him. I can't live like that. Please, help me." Sienna's stomach twisted into knots. If Lila ran, Killian would find her. There was no question about that. He was a man who left no debts unpaid, and breaking a marriage contract with someone like him was not a debt Lila could afford. "You have to calm down," Sienna whispered. "Where are you?" "The dressing room," Lila sniffled. "The wedding's in 2 hours, but I can't go through with it. Sienna, if I run, he'll hunt me down. But if I stay, I'll never be free." Sienna squeezed her eyes shut, mind racing. There was no easy way out of this. Then, before she could say another word, a sharp knock sounded in the background. "Miss Lila," a firm male voice said. "It's time." Lila gasped. "Oh, God, they're here. Sienna, please." The line went dead. Sienna shot to her feet, her pulse roaring in her ears. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and keys and sprinted out of her apartment. She didn't have a plan. All she knew was that Lila needed her. The bridal suite was in chaos when Sienna arrived at the grand estate where the wedding was set to take place. Dozens of staff bustled about, preparing for what was meant to be the wedding of the year. Sienna pushed her way through the hallway and burst into the dressing room, locking the door behind her. Lila was standing in the middle of the room in a breathtaking white gown, her eyes wide and filled with panic. "Sienna?" "No time," Sienna said. "If you're running, you have to go now." Lila swallowed hard. "But, Killian." "I'll handle it," Sienna interrupted. "Just go." Lila's lip quivered. "Sienna, he'll destroy you." Sienna's heart pounded, but she forced a reassuring smile. "I'll be fine." For a moment, Lila hesitated. Then, with one last desperate look, she tore off the veil, grabbed a coat, and disappeared through the side door. Sienna exhaled sharply. Then she turned to the wedding dress. A terrifying idea formed in her mind. It was insane, reckless, but there was no other way. With shaking hands, she stepped forward and began to undress. Minutes later, the heavy silk gown draped over her body, fitting snugly despite not being tailored for her. A knock rattled the door. "Miss Lila, it's time." Sienna took a deep breath. Then she opened the door and stepped into a role that could very well be the biggest mistake of her life. The grand hall was packed with hundreds of high-profile guests. Every seat was filled, and at the altar stood the man everyone feared, Killian Drake. His jet-black hair was neatly styled, his suit pressed to perfection. He looked composed, almost indifferent. But as Sienna walked down the aisle, his icy blue eyes locked onto her. And in that moment, he knew. His gaze flickered, his sharp jaw tensing. But he said nothing. Sienna's pulse pounded with every step. The whispers had already begun. People shifted in their seats, murmuring behind delicate hands. Something was wrong. Killian's best man, a tall, broad-shouldered man, leaned in and muttered something to him. Killian didn't react. Instead, as Sienna reached the altar, he extended his hand. His fingers curled around hers, firm, unyielding. Sienna swallowed hard. The officiant began the vows, but she barely heard them. Then came the moment. Do you, Lila Windsor, take Killian Drake to be your lawfully wedded husband? Sienna's throat closed. Killian's grip on her hand tightened ever so slightly. She couldn't say no. She couldn't run. So she did the only thing she could. I do. The room was deathly silent. The officiant turned to Killian. And do you, Killian Drake, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? A pause. Killian's piercing eyes never left hers. I do. The moment the words left his lips, a chill ran down Sienna's spine. He knew. He definitely knew. And yet, he was still playing along. The realization was far more terrifying than if he had called her out. As Killian slid the heavy wedding band onto her finger, his lips barely moved, but his words sent a shiver through her. Who are you really protecting, Sienna? Her blood ran cold. He knew her name, and now she was his wife. Sienna could feel her heart pounding against her ribs as she walked beside Killian Drake. Now her husband, down the aisle. Every step felt like a countdown to something inevitable, something terrifying. Killian's grip on her hand was firm, but not affectionate. There was no warmth in the way he held her, no sign of a man who had just vowed to spend the rest of his life with her. Because he knew. And yet, he hadn't stopped the wedding. Sienna could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes watching them, whispering behind their hands. The guests might not have understood what was off just yet, but the tension was palpable. By the time they reached the reception hall, a grand ballroom lined with extravagant crystal chandeliers and opulent floral arrangements, the rumors were already spreading like wildfire. That's not Lila. Something's wrong. Where's the real bride? Sienna swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep a straight face as the reception began. She had bought Lila time, but at what cost? The first dance. The sound of clinking glasses filled the air as the MC cheerfully announced. And now, the couple's first dance as husband and wife. Sienna's entire body tensed as Killian turned to face her. The smirk on his lips was almost mocking as he extended his hand. Sienna had no choice but to take it. He led her onto the dance floor, the crowd watching in anticipation. As the music began, a slow, haunting melody. Killian's hands moved to her waist, his touch feather-light yet possessive. "You've been very quiet, Mrs. Drake," he murmured. The way he said her new name sent a shiver down her spine. "I could say the same about you," she replied, forcing herself to meet his icy blue gaze. Killian let out a soft chuckle, but there was no amusement in his eyes. "Do you think I'm a fool, Sienna?" Her breath caught. There it was. He was done pretending. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She had known this moment was coming. But now that it was here, she felt utterly exposed. Killian leaned in slightly, his breath warm against her ear. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Sienna forced herself to stay composed. "Notice what?" Killian pulled back just enough to look at her. His gaze was sharp, assessing, as if he were peeling back every layer of her thoughts. "Everything," he said smoothly. "The way your hands trembled when you took your vows. The hesitation in your voice. The way you flinched when I touched you." His fingers brushed against her spine, making her stiffen. "I knew the moment you walked down that aisle," he continued. "You're not Lila." Sienna's stomach dropped. She had suspected he knew, but hearing him say it aloud made it real. Her fingers clenched against his shoulder. "Then why didn't you stop the wedding?" Killian's smirk widened, but his eyes darkened. "Why would I? This is far more interesting." The music swelled around them as he spun her effortlessly across the dance floor. To the outside world, they looked like the perfect couple, beautiful, poised, and in love. But inside, Sienna felt like she was standing on the edge of a knife. He was toying with her, testing her, and worst of all, he was enjoying it. A dangerous game. The dance ended, and the guests erupted into applause. Killian led her off the dance floor, his grip on her waist unwavering. The moment they reached the far end of the ballroom, where no one could overhear. He turned to her with that same infuriating smirk. "Now," he said casually, reaching for a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "Why don't you tell me where my real bride is?" Sienna swallowed hard. She had no answer. Killian sipped his champagne, watching her with the patience of a predator playing with its prey. "You're protecting her, aren't you?" he mused. "How noble." Sienna lifted her chin. She was scared. Killian's gaze flickered. Scared of what? She hesitated. "Of you," she wanted to say. But something in Killian's expression made her pause. Was Lila truly afraid of him? Or was there something else? "You already know the answer," Sienna said instead. Killian tilted his head slightly, studying her. Then, without warning, he set his glass down and leaned in. Sienna's breath hitched as his lips brushed just above her ear. "Don't assume you understand me, Sienna," he whispered. "I'm not the villain in this story." She pulled back, her heart pounding. "Then what are you?" Killian smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The one who never loses." Before she could respond, a loud ding echoed through ballroom. All heads turned toward the massive LED screen at the front of the room. The words that appeared made Sienna's blood turn to ice. "Billionaire Killian Drake's wife exposed as a fraud." Gasps erupted throughout the crowd. Sienna's stomach clenched as she stared at the screen in horror. Someone had leaked the truth. Killian didn't move, didn't react. But when she turned to face him, his expression sent chills down her spine. He wasn't surprised. No, he was expecting this. And that scared her more than anything. Then, as if on cue, his phone rang. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and smirked. "Ah," he murmured. "Would you look at that?" Sienna's pulse roared in her ears. Killian turned the screen toward her, letting her see the name flashing on the caller ID. "Lila." Sienna's breath caught. She reached for the phone, but Killian pulled away, his expression unreadable. "She's in trouble," he said smoothly. Then he lifted the phone to his ear. "Lila," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Did you really think you could run from me?" Sienna's heart stopped. She had made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. And now she was trapped. Sienna's pulse thundered in her ears as she watched Killian lift the phone to his ear. "Lila," he murmured, his voice as smooth as silk, yet laced with something dark beneath the surface. "Did you really think you could run from me?" Sienna felt the room shrink, her breath shallow as she waited for Lila's response. But the phone was on speaker, and the only sound that came through was shaky breathing. Then a whisper. "Killian, please." Sienna clenched her fists. Lila sounded terrified. "What did you expect would happen, darling?" Killian continued, his tone deceptively gentle. "You think you can humiliate me in front of my business partners, my investors, the entire world, without consequences?" Sienna stepped forward. "Killian, stop." His icy gaze flicked to her, sharp and unreadable. "Where are you, Lila?" he asked, ignoring Sienna completely. A beat of silence. Then a choked sob. I can't tell you." Sienna could practically hear the way Killian's patience thinned. He inhaled deeply, pressing his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose as if restraining himself. "Then allow me to rephrase," he said smoothly. "Where are you before I find you myself?" Sienna's stomach twisted. Lila let out another small cry. "Please, Killian, don't do this." Killian exhaled, shaking his head like he was speaking to a misbehaving child. "Oh, Lila," he sighed. "You had your chance to walk down the aisle. You chose to run. But unfortunately for you," his voice dropped into something colder, something final. "I don't take betrayal lightly." Sienna couldn't take it anymore. She lunged forward, snatching the phone from his grasp before he could stop her. "Lila," she breathed. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "Sienna?" Lila's voice wavered. I don't know. I thought I was. But now..." Sienna gritted her teeth. "Just tell me where you are. I'll come to you. We'll figure this out." But before Lila could respond, the line went dead. Sienna froze. A tense silence filled the space between her and Killian. Slowly, he turned to face her, his expression unreadable. That, he said, voice like ice, was a very foolish thing to do. Sienna swallowed hard. "She's scared, Killian." He studied her for a long moment before tilting his head slightly. And you're willing to risk your safety for hers? She lifted her chin, refusing to back down. Yes. A flicker of something, amusement, crossed his features. Then, before she could react, he closed the space between them, backing her against the grand marble wall of the ballroom. You put on that dress, he murmured, caging her in with his presence. You stood at that altar. You said I do. His fingers traced a wedding band on her hand. You chose to step into this world, Sienna, he said softly. So, tell me, what made you think you could simply walk away? Sienna's heart slammed against her ribs. I was trying to protect Lila, she whispered. His lips quirked, though it wasn't a smile. And now, who's protecting you? A heavy silence settled between them. Then, Killian pulled back, straightening his cufflinks as if nothing had happened. You want to find her? He said casually. Fine. I'll take you to her myself. Sienna frowned. What? Killian smirked. You don't honestly think I don't know where she is, do you? Her breath caught. No, there was no way. Killian stepped forward, lowering his voice. I let her run, Sienna. The word sent a chill down her spine. She thought she was escaping me, he murmured. But the truth is, I've known exactly where she is this entire time. Sienna shook her head. Then why haven't you done anything? Killian tilted his head, his gaze gleaming with something dark. Because, my dear wife, he said softly, this isn't about Lila anymore. Her stomach twisted. What do you mean? She asked, dreading the answer. Killian leaned in slightly, his breath warm against her ear. You'll see soon enough. A trap set in motion. The black Rolls-Royce cruised through the city under the cover of night. Killian sat beside her in the back seat, perfectly composed, while Sienna's mind raced with a million unanswered questions. Why was he allowing her to see Lila? Why had he let Lila run in the first place? And, most importantly, what was he planning? Where are we going? She asked, breaking the silence. Killian sipped his scotch, unbothered. You'll know soon enough. Her fingers curled into fists. You keep saying that. He chuckled. Because I enjoy watching you squirm. Sienna glared at him. You're a sadist. Killian merely smiled. And you're still wearing my ring. Her pulse spiked. She wanted to rip the damn thing off. But something in his gaze stopped her. Before she could respond, the car slowed. Sienna looked out the window, and her blood ran cold. They were pulling up to an abandoned warehouse. No. The driver opened the door, and Killian stepped out, holding out a hand for her. Sienna hesitated. Killian! Get out of the car, Sienna. His voice was calm. Too calm. She had no choice. With a deep breath, she took his hand and stepped onto the cracked pavement. The moment she did, a shadow moved in the warehouse entrance. Sienna's heart slammed against her ribs as a figure emerged from the darkness. Lila, but she wasn't alone. Standing beside her, smirking like the devil himself, was Adrian Calloway, Killian's sworn enemy. And that's when Sienna realized she had just walked into a trap. Sienna's breath caught in her throat as she took in the sight before her. Lila stood at the center of the warehouse, her hands folded neatly in front of her. But there was no fear in her eyes, no desperation, no regret. And beside her, Adrian Calloway, Killian's most notorious rival, smirked as he leaned casually against a rusted metal pillar. Killian didn't react. He simply exhaled, the air around him crackling with quiet amusement. Well, he murmured, sliding his hands into his pockets. Isn't this interesting? Sienna's pulse pounded in her ears. What is this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian chuckled. I'd say it's a reunion, wouldn't you? Killian didn't even spare him a glance. Instead, his gaze locked onto Lila. You've been quite busy, haven't you? Lila lifted her chin, her expression unreadable. You always told me I should be strategic. Killian let out a low hum of approval. And here, I thought you were running out of fear. I was, she admitted. But not from you. Sienna frowned. Then from what? Lila's lips curved into a slow, almost pitying smile. Oh, Sienna, she said softly. You still don't get it, do you? A chill ran down Sienna's spine. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. Lila sighed. "Did you really think I was some helpless bride, trying to escape a marriage I didn't want?" Sienna stiffened. "You were afraid. You called me. You begged for help." Lila gave a small, amused shake of her head. "I never needed help, Sienna." Her stomach twisted. "No!" The word barely escaped her lips. "You wouldn't." "Oh, but I did." And just like that, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Sienna had been played. From the very beginning. Lila hadn't run because she was scared. She had run because this had always been the plan. Killian's lips twitched. "How disappointing," he mused. "I thought you'd be more creative, Lila." Adrian's smirk widened. "You always underestimate the people closest to you, Drake. And that's your biggest weakness." Killian finally turned his gaze to Adrian, the air between them thick with history and hostility. "My biggest weakness," Killian repeated, voice dangerously soft. Adrian stepped forward, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. "You're powerful," he acknowledged, "but you're not untouchable. And now, thanks to your little bride swap, the world knows it." Sienna flinched as Adrian gestured toward the massive screen hanging from the ceiling of the warehouse. It flickered to life, displaying the same headline that had shocked the wedding guests hours earlier. "Billionaire Killian Drake's wife exposed as a fraud." But this time the footage changed. Clips of the wedding played on loop, zoomed in on Sienna's face, highlighting every nervous glance, every hesitation, overlaid with commentary. Killian Drake, known for his ruthless precision, has been publicly deceived in a scandal that shakes the business world. If he couldn't even control his own wedding, how can he control his empire? Sienna's breath hitched. This wasn't just a personal attack. This was an assassination of Killian's power. He was being humiliated, discredited, and for the first time, real fear lay Sienna's veins. Because Killian Drake was many things. But forgiving was not one of them. The price of betrayal. Sienna turned back to Killian, expecting rage, expecting cold fury. But instead, he laughed, a deep, low chuckle. Lila and Adrian both stiffened. Killian clapped his hands slowly, his amusement sharp and deliberate. "I have to hand it to you," he said. "It's bold." Adrian narrowed his eyes. "You think this is funny?" Killian arched a brow. "I think it's predictable." Adrian's jaw clenched. "You won't be laughing when the board forces you out of your own company." Killian tilted his head. "Are you under the impression that a few news clips and some cheap theatrics can topple me?" Sienna held her breath. Adrian folded his arms. "It's not just the media. I have the numbers. Drake, the shareholders are losing confidence in you. Your stocks are plummeting. And soon, your empire will belong to me." Silence stretched between them. Then, Killian smiled. A slow, calculated, terrifying smile. "Oh, Adrian," he said softly, "I let you think you were winning." Adrian's smirk faltered. "What?" Killian took a step forward. "You thought you had control of the narrative," he mused. "You thought you had me cornered. But the problem with playing chess against me, another step, is that I'm always 5 moves ahead." A phone vibrated in Adrian's pocket. Sienna saw the flicker of confusion in his eyes as he pulled it out. The color drained from his face. Lila's brows furrowed. "Adrian." He didn't answer. His fingers gripped the phone tighter as he scrolled through whatever message had just come in. Killian watched him with cool satisfaction. "Something wrong?" he asked mockingly. Adrian's jaw clenched. "You." Killian smirked. "Ah, you're starting to figure it out." Lila turned to Adrian. "What's going on?" Adrian was already backing away, his fingers flying over his phone screen. Sienna swallowed hard. "What did you do?" she whispered. Killian glanced at her, amusement still dancing in his icy blue eyes. "I made a few calls." Adrian cursed under his breath. Killian stepped closer. "You wanted to humiliate me," he said. "Destroy me. But you forgot one very important thing." Adrian's hands curled into fists. "And what's that?" Killian's smile turned razor sharp. "I don't lose." At that moment, the warehouse doors burst open. Men in black suits flooded the space. Killian's men. Lila gasped, stepping back. Adrian. Leave, Adrian ordered her, his voice tight with rage. Now. But it was too late. Killian's men seized Adrian, shoving him to his knees. Lila turned to run, only for Killian to grab her wrist. You wanted to betray me, he murmured. Then watch what happens next. Sienna's breath hitched as Killian turned his gaze to her, his expression unreadable. Then he extended a hand. Let's go, Mrs. Drake. Sienna hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached for him, and the world faded to black. The car ride back to Killian's penthouse was suffocatingly silent. Sienna sat stiffly beside him in the back seat, her mind spinning. She had just witnessed the brutal downfall of Adrian Calloway, the man who had orchestrated Killian's public humiliation. And Lila, her best friend, had been a part of it. It was too much, too surreal. Killian, on the other hand, was the picture of composure, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable as he scrolled through his phone. Finally, Sienna couldn't take it anymore. What did you do to Adrian? She asked, her voice tight. Killian didn't even glance at her. I neutralized the threat. Her stomach churned. What does that mean? He tapped his phone screen lazily, then turned it toward her. Sienna's eyes widened as she read the news headline, displayed in bold letters. Breaking. Business tycoon Adrian Calloway under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage. Her pulse pounded. You set him up, she whispered. Killian smirked. I didn't set him up. I simply exposed what was already there. Sienna swallowed hard. This man, her husband, had orchestrated Adrian's complete and utter ruin in a matter of hours. What about Lila? She asked. Killian's smirk faded. Lila made her choice. Something about the finality in his tone made Sienna's stomach drop. She's my best friend, she pressed. She was desperate, Killian. She betrayed me, he cut in smoothly. And she betrayed you. Sienna fell silent. She hated how right he was. Lila had used her, had manipulated her loyalty, her kindness, her belief that she was protecting a friend. Killian sighed, pocketing his phone. She's not my concern anymore. Sienna hesitated. So you're letting her go? He didn't respond right away. Then, finally, she'll wish I hadn't. A shiver ran down Sienna's spine. Welcome to the cage. When they arrived at Killian's penthouse, Sienna barely had time to take a breath before he was leading her inside. The space was vast, sleek, every inch screaming power and wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering city, the skyline stretching endlessly into the night. Killian loosened his tie and tossed his suit jacket over a chair. Then, slowly he turned to face her. Sienna's heart pounded. She had been so caught up in Lila and Adrian's betrayal that she had forgotten one crucial detail. She was still his wife. She was still trapped in his world. And now, she was alone with him. Killian studied her, his gaze slow and deliberate. You look terrified, he murmured. Sienna forced herself to lift her chin. I should be. His lips twitched. Yes, you should. She inhaled sharply. Are you going to punish me too? His brows lifted slightly, as if the thought had just occurred to him. Then, before she could react, he closed the space between them. Her breath hitched as he lifted a hand, tracing a single finger along the curve of her jaw. No, he murmured. You're far more interesting this way. Sienna's pulse hammered as his touch sent a shiver through her body. You're playing with me, she whispered. Killian smirked. Of course I am. She clenched her fists. You could have called off the wedding. You could have stopped all of this before it even started. He tilted his head, amused. And where's the fun in that? Sienna exhaled sharply, stepping away. You wanted this. Killian didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned against the bar, watching her with something almost possessive. I knew from the moment you put on that dress, he admitted. You weren't running to protect Lila. You were running from me. Sienna's breath caught. He had seen through her from the very beginning. Killian took a slow sip of his whiskey. You fascinate me, Sienna. She swallowed hard. I don't want to fascinate you. He chuckled. Liar. Her heart skipped. You don't own me, Killian. His smirk deepened. Don't I? She glared at him. You forced me into this marriage. No, he corrected. You chose this. You could have walked away, but you didn't. You stepped into my world. And now, he lifted her left hand, brushing his thumb over the wedding ring on her finger. You're mine. Sienna's pulse pounded. This wasn't the reaction she had expected. She had thought Killian would be furious, vengeful, that he would lash out, demand retribution. Instead, he was amused. And somehow, that was infinitely worse, because it meant he wasn't done playing with her. Not even close. A deal with the devil. Sienna took a shaky breath, stepping back. I want out, she said. Annul the marriage. Let me go. Killian arched a brow. Just like that. Yes. He smirked. That's cute. Her nails dug into her palms. I'm serious, Killian. So am I, he said smoothly. You're my wife now, Sienna, and I never let go of what's mine. A lump formed in her throat. So you're keeping me prisoner? He exhaled, almost bored. You're not a prisoner. Then let me leave. His smirk vanished. No. The finality in his tone sent chills down her spine. Sienna's breathing grew unsteady. What do you want from me? Killian studied her for a moment, then took a step closer. I want you to learn, he murmured. She frowned. Learn what? His fingers traced the curve of her wrist. His touch feather-light but commanding. What it means, he said softly, to belong to me. Sienna's throat went dry. Killian leaned in, his lips grazing just above her ear. You stepped into my world, Sienna, he murmured, and now you're playing by my rules. She squeezed her eyes shut. She was in deep, too deep, and for the first time, she realized she might never escape him. Sienna had never felt more trapped, not in that wedding dress, not when she had said, I do, not even when she had realized she had been played by her best friend. No, this was worse, because now she wasn't just caught in Killian's web. She was part of it, the golden cage. The morning light filtered to the penthouse windows, painting the room in warm golds and soft shadows. Sienna sat at the edge of the massive bed, still in the silk slip she had been given last night. She hadn't slept. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she felt his presence, not in a nightmare, in the way his voice curled around her thoughts, in the way his hands had traced her skin when he slipped the wedding ring onto her finger, in the way he had said, You belong to me now. Her fingers toyed with the ring, a heavy weight on her hand. She should take it off. She wanted to take it off. But somehow she couldn't. The door creaked open, and she shot to her feet. Killian stood in the doorway, a vision of power in his crisp black suit. His tie was undone, the top buttons of his shirt left open. Calculated imperfection. She hated how effortless he made it look. Good morning, Mrs. Drake, he drawled. She crossed her arms. I want a divorce. His lips twitched. And I want my coffee black. Neither of us are getting what we want today. Sienna's nails dug into her palms. You can't just keep me here. He stepped into the room, his movements slow, deliberate. I think you're under the mistaken impression that you're my prisoner. She scoffed. What else would you call this? Killian hummed, considering. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek envelope. Sienna frowned as he tossed it onto the bed. What is that? Your options, he said smoothly. Hesitant, she picked up the envelope and pulled out the papers inside. The first page made her stomach drop. A divorce settlement. A way out. Her eyes flickered to him suspiciously. You're just giving this to me? Killian's smirk was lazy, confident. With conditions. Sienna exhaled sharply. Of course. She skimmed the fine print. Then she stopped cold. Condition number 1. You leave with nothing. Her lips parted. You're serious. He didn't respond. She flipped to the next page, where it was spelled out in brutal clarity. If she left, she would be cut off completely. Not just from him. From everything. Her job? Gone. Her financial accounts? Frozen. Every connection she had built while working as an executive assistant? Vanished. I built my career on my own, she said, her voice shaking with anger. You can't take that from me. Killian, scared. That's where you're wrong, sweetheart. You see, everything you built, it exists in my world. And the moment you walk away, you're erased from it. Sienna's hands trembled. It was a power play, a move designed to make sure she couldn't leave. Or, if she did, she left ruined. She lifted her gaze to meet his. You really are a monster, she whispered. Killian stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating off him. His fingers traced along her jaw, tilted her chin up ever so slightly. And yet, he murmured, your heart is racing right now. Her breath caught, because he was right. God help her. She wasn't just angry. She was afraid. And worse, some dark, twisted part of her was thrilled. Checkmate. Sienna threw the papers back at him. Fine, she spat. I'll leave with nothing. Killian arched a brow. Will you? She lifted her chin. Watch me. He let out a soft chuckle. And then he pulled out another envelope. Sienna frowned. What is that? She demanded. His smirk deepened. Your other option. Her stomach twisted. Slowly, she pulled out the second set of papers, and her world tilted. It wasn't another divorce agreement. It was a contract, a partnership agreement. Her eyes flew to his, stunned. What is this? Killian leaned in, his voice dangerously soft. You want your freedom? He murmured. Earn it. Her pulse pounded. You want it to work for you? No, darling. His smirk was pure sin. I want you to work with me. Sienna swallowed hard. Why would you do this? Killian traced a finger over her wrist, sending a shiver down her spine. Because you intrigue me, he murmured. Because you've proven you can play the game. His fingers curled beneath her chin, tilting her face toward him. And because Sienna Drake, his voice dropped lower. You belong to me. Her breath hitched, because deep down, she knew he was right. She could leave. She could walk away. But she wouldn't. Not when she could feel the pulse of power beneath her fingertips. Not when she could taste the dangerous thrill of playing his game. Not when some dark, forbidden part of her wanted to see how far she could go. Her hand closed around the contract. Her decision made. Killian's smirk was slow, knowing. Good girl, he murmured. And just like that, she became his queen. The end. Enjoyed the story? We invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing more beautiful stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your effort. See you again.